Said yourself, Israel is the liberal democracy in the region. What responsibility does Israel have as that democracy to ensure that civilians are not starving during the prosecution of Israel's war aims?
But there you go again. You keep on saying that civilians are starving. That is not the case.
Here's an interview that Naftali Bennett did on BBC. Policy-wise, when he was in office, I can't say I loved everything about, the way he did things. I had some pretty, I would say, big grievances about the way he did some things. I just had very strong disagreements. But when it comes to dealing with the media, Naftali Bennett is the best. He's absolutely savage. He doesn't allow them to get away with any of their trash. He calls it out. He stops it in its tracks. He does it exactly how it should be done. I mean, he's honestly, I think, the best of the best when it comes to dealing with the media on this topic. And BBC is the opposite end of the spectrum. They're the worst of the worst, lying, dishonest trash. So let's have a watch and see.
Said yourself, Israel is the liberal democracy in the region. What responsibility does Israel have as that democracy to ensure that civilians are not starving during the prosecution of Israel's war aims?
But there you go again. You keep on saying that civilians are starving. That is not the case. That's simply not the case on the ground.
So you reject everything that we're hearing from the UN and aid organizations.
Is that a big surprise? Do you know that the UN Human Rights Committee has been led by Iran? I mean, these international institutions, everyone knows they're a sham. And instead of focusing on a genocidal regime that wants to wipe out Israel, we had nothing that we wanted to hurt the Gazans. They started this war by a massacre.
Hamas
bend over
started the war, not Gazans?
to prevent Let me finish. We bend over backward to prevent unnecessary deaths of Gazans. The problem is that Hamas uses hospitals and schools and homes as a terror base, and we're fighting this crazy situation. And what now the ICC is doing, it's giving backwind to the worst terror regimes in the world. And make no mistake, this is a war for everyone, because if we do not defeat the radical jihadi Islam, it's going to hit Washington, D.C. and London and Paris, and in fact it has already. So this is a war that we're fighting against terror organizations, and we expect the world to back the liberal democracy and not back the genocidal regime.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Bennett, because I saw on X you also wrote, all Israelis left and right stand behind the war whose goals are to release the kidnapped Israelis, demolish Hamas, and restore security to Israel. We have spoken to a number of family members of hostages who say they reject that. They believe that the Prime Minister has failed to secure the release of the hostages just to protect his own political future. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I'll say this. All Israelis left and right are very angry about this ICC ruling. And, I'm no big supporter of Prime Minister Netanyahu, not a supporter of his government, but this warrant is not against the Prime Minister. It's against the state of Israel, and it's trying to tie our hands while we're trying to fight terror. Regarding your question, there are meaningful debates in Israel regarding the prosecution of the war. For example, I think we should have done it much more quickly and more intensively in order to get the results. But those are tactical disagreements that, like in any democracy.
I mean, from the outset, first of all, he did it a couple of times there. First of all, when she talks about the Gazans starving, and he says, there you go again. This is not the case, right? He doesn't allow her to continue beyond the lie. I love the way he does that. He shuts down the lie. As soon as she says something that's just false or dishonest, he stops her right there in her tracks and addresses it rather than letting her get away with it. Finish a point, continue with something that's based on a lie, allow her to build it up and then respond later after she's already, maybe built some momentum and started to make a point. And so he stops her in her tracks and says, there you go again. This is not the case, because it was a lie. Now, that's first of all the statement she said about them starving, but I want to just take a second to look at the dishonesty, the intentional, meticulously, almost curated, designed, engineered dishonesty of her statement. What did she say? She said something that makes no sense. She says, as the liberal democracy, as the democracy in the Middle East, isn't it Israel's responsibility, or, what responsibility does Israel have to make sure that Gazans aren't starving during the war? Excuse me? Can you explain the connection? The fact that Israel is a democracy therefore makes it their responsibility to make sure that nobody else is starving in the region during a war? What does one have to do with the other? Now, if she had said, as a liberal democracy, shouldn't Israel make a point of ensuring they don't cause unnecessary starvation, maybe that could be something that could be argued. It happens to be that the facts show that that's not the case. Israel is allowing in enough food every single day for every single person in Gaza to be gaining weight, and to whatever extent that's not happening, that's Hamas, and everybody knows this. So first of all, she's basing her entire point on a lie. But not only that, the statement she makes actually doesn't even mean anything. As a democracy, shouldn't they take responsibility to see that no one in Gaza is starving during their war? Why is that their job? There's a government in Gaza. It was voted into power in Gaza by the people of Gaza. That's their job. Pretty sure that the job of the government of Gaza is to take care of the people of Gaza. It's not the job of the government of Israel. I'm sorry. She says something that actually doesn't make any sense if you just listen to the words. It makes no sense on its face, the whole thing. But she knows, she worded it intentionally in a way that she knows that most people aren't going to pick up on the fact that what she's saying doesn't even make any sense. She thinks she can get away with it because she doesn't understand who she's dealing with. She doesn't know Naftali Bennett. But that doesn't absolve her of the guilt of being a dishonest, lying, not journalist. Journalist is certainly not the right word. A propagandist, because that's what she is, clearly. And so I love the fact that he cuts her off right away and says, there you go again, that's not the case. Immediately shuts down the lie. And then she goes on again about the UN. Oh, what? So you're disagreeing with the UN? The UN and the ICC, even more so, have taken off any semblance of mask whatsoever, even stopped bothering to try and pretend that they're anything other than an enormous joke. For her to behave as though anybody takes them seriously, I think, is almost an even bigger joke. We all know that the UN's a joke now. We all know that the ICC is a joke. Everybody knows it's a joke. Some people pretend that they're not a joke because the joke that they are happens to be convenient for them to the extent that anyone takes them seriously, which is approximately zero. But for her to act as though it's a given, oh, how dare you disagree with the UN? Are you disagreeing with the UN? Yeah, disagreeing with the UN because they're a joke and everybody knows it. And if you take them seriously, that makes you into a joke too. And then he's talking about Hamas or he says Gazans, and she tries to cut him off, and so it's not Gazans, it's Hamas. And what does he do? Again, he says, let me finish. He doesn't allow her to interrupt and to try to derail his argument, even if the point she's making is valid, which is tenuous at best to say that it is, because the vast overwhelming majority of Gazans supported October 7th and all of them celebrated it in the streets. But even if you want to say that it's not the case, she was using that as an excuse to try to derail his argument, and he didn't allow it. And he maintained control of the conversation, and he said to her very confidently, let me finish. Don't try to cut me off. Don't try to derail me. Let me finish. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, she's doing her job. She works for BBC, and their job is to misrepresent things and to present their biased, skewed, often evil agenda about things. And he was just not going to have any of it. And that's exactly why he's the best. When it comes to doing media about Israel, I think he's number one, the best. Go Bennett.